So yeah, speaking of solid video games, actually, I have no idea if this game will be solid or not. Compile Heart. Did you know Compile Heart? They are I think they're the Neptunia people and things like that. They make anime games mostly, and so they are making this game called was it Scarlead? I wrote down Scarlet Salvation, but I think this actually says Scarlead Salvation now that I'm looking at it. What does the URL say actually? SLS. Okay, so it is Scarlead Salvation. I thought it was Scarlet Salvation. Caught it just in time. This is like an anime girl shooter kind of thing. But it kind of feels like it's based off. There's like a Sony PS5 game called Returnal, and it has a very similar kind of look and aesthetic to it, where there's a lot of these kind of like I don't know what you would call it, like energy balls that kind of fly at the player, and so it's like almost like this 3D bullet hell kind of look. And I think it is also like a roguelite thing where you're like kind of building you know, different builds to on different runs and things like that. I excuse me, I don't know what is immediately appealing about this game. One, I do like anime aesthetic, that's for sure. But I think I also still have this thing where when I see a Japanese company try to do a shooter, I am immediately interested because it's the genre that I don't necessarily associate with a Japanese company. So I always feel like they're going to make interesting decisions. Like when you play Peach Beach Splash, there's going to be like a lock-on feature. So it's more about movement, almost like in a Gundam Versus style way than it is a shooter kind of thing, right? And so I feel like I don't see any of that here on the surface level, but I have that association with like Japanese shooters as a whole. But I think the big thing here, what they're just kind of having as the main selling point at the moment, is that there's like a dash mechanic where you can dash through shots and dash through, I think, certain barriers and things like that. And in general, it's just to kind of evade attacks. But there's also like a handful of different style guns, laser guns and things like that. And I'm sure it's just like, you know, the typical guns. And then also there's like a melee stun move kind of thing. So it is a sexy game too. As you take damage, your body armor starts to rip off. Which, you know, I think if you play like something like Center or Peach Beach Slash is about right. And they kind of play that up. I think there's like when they were showing off the game recently at an event, I think you could get like a postcard that was like her with almost all her armor ripped off. So I have on screen now the limited edition version, and like one of the outfits on the big box is her with like, you know, probably 40% of her outfit all ripped up. So they're definitely leaning into that kind of thing. It's interesting because you know, one of the things that kind of was a point of discussion with Kandagawa Jet Girls at the time, which is kind of the, in some ways, spiritual successor to Peach Beach Splash, but it also is a completely different video game because it's like a racing game. That game did not have any outfit ripping. And people at the time felt like it was because Sony was like putting these kind of like overly intrusive, or at least what they would present as overly intrusive things in place that like prevented certain types of sexualization of characters and things like that. However, recently I was thinking with this game, Scarlead, was that what it's called? Scarlead? Scarlead Salvation. I was thinking about this recently, but I feel like the Sony like sexy time discrimination stuff, if you want to call it that, is no longer really much of a thing. I feel like it is generally gone, and I think part of that feeling might be related to like Stellar Blade. That game, I think very much leaned into like the main character being, you know, generally like a sexy lady. I don't know for sure. I never played it, but that was the general feel. Maybe it's just there's too much conversation around it, so it looks that way, even though it's not really that. And Sony like straight up just like partnered with them. I think they maybe have like acquired enough of a stake in that company to make it like them like a second party publisher now. And we're looking at this game here, and I just generally don't feel like this game, like this looks like Senran Kagura level of just like, yeah, it's a sexy lady and her clothes rip off as you take damage kind of thing, right? And I feel like the narrative back then, at least, is that Sony would not necessarily let this fly. And I wonder if you're seeing some kind of like shift back and things like that. I mean, I think one thing that has been more apparent to me is more of a feeling that mobile games probably are having some level of impact on like people's willingness to you know, interact with games like this that are on this more like sexy level kind of thing. It is something I need to talk to somebody at some point about, probably. Not that it's like a really big deal. It's just to me, it's pretty obvious that's like one of the selling points here, and it's a compile heart game, so that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's just I think things go through phases back and forth, and also part of it's your own perception, right? Like, what do you think is happening in the industry? And I think in my mind, it seems like things are shifting back to be a little bit more like, hey, yeah, it's okay if like ladies are sexy kind of thing. I feel like that's not so much as much of an issue with some people, but I'm sure a lot of it depends on the community you're in and who you're talking to and things like that. So, and I've made some very specific choices to engage with that stuff a little bit more to kind of better understand it. So that also could play a role in like why I feel like this stuff has a little bit more presence. But anyways, Scarlet Salvation comes out May 29th. So I might try it. I think it is a PS5 physical game, so maybe I'll check it out on PlayStation 5.